So, Maura, how did you become an expert then in time management and productivity?
I've been working for my whole professional career in the productivity industry. My first job right out of college was for a company that sold paper-based planners and training to go with those. And so when I left there, I had a really unique education in kind of what everybody was teaching in time management. And about, 6 or 7 years into my business that I started after I left that other company, I just realized that one of my mentors had put a bug in my ear about this idea that time management is not really a useful concept anymore. And she had an idea that she called focus management. And that kind of put me on this path to what I teach now. And I'm sure you'll have a bunch of questions about that we can talk about.
So how is your approach now different than the traditional time management?
Yeah, I took off on this idea of focus management, and it kind of expanded. I really started to think about it and write about the fact that not having enough time is really not our problem today in the 21st century, right? We've all had those days where we feel like we were busy all day, but we got nothing done. And we all also have days where we feel like, oh my gosh, that was such a good day. I got so much done. And in both of those instances, we had the same amount of time, same 24 hours, right? It's not like we had more hours on one day and fewer hours on a different day. Our biggest challenge in the 21st century is that we have too many distractions. And focus is important, but to me, focus was just a small piece. And really what I think is the key is attention. And to me, attention is bigger than focus, because attention is sort of the doorway to your brain, to your learning, to your thinking, to your creativity. The things that you give your attention to determine the experiences that you have. And so to me, attention management is much more important and much more useful than time management.
Yeah. So what's the big difference then? How would you characterize the difference between time management and attention management?
Attention management is a collection of brain states, a collection of sort of behaviors. It encompasses certainly focus and concentration, but also it's really about maximizing your brain power in a moment to get the results that you want. So for example, taking, sort of recognizing the brain state that you're in and shifting to a brain state that will produce the best results in the moment. Most of us spend our days in what I call the reactive and distracted state. We're jumping from thing to thing. We've got a bunch of things half done, and we keep switching. And there's a cost to the switching. And so when we are constantly switching and doing only a little bit of something and then switching to another thing, we're really short-circuiting our brain power and our ability to do our best work. So attention management encompasses more than just focus and concentration. It's also about daydreaming, and it's about being mindful and present and trying to be present. But also when we work at being present for a while, then we might get lucky enough to tip ourselves into flow, which is a really productive brain state, but it's one that we can't enter on our own. So flow is a component of attention management as well. So it's sort of this collection of all of these different mind states, and then the ability to recognize where is my head right now, and is that going to give me the best results in this moment. And in this moment, you might be doing a task, you might be having a conversation with another person, you might be in an experience, right? Sightseeing or in a movie or reading a book or whatever it is. But the point is, what headspace will give me the best results, the most meaningful results in this moment, and making a conscious shift into that state. That's ultimately the goal of attention management.
Yeah, cool. So attention is something we can control, time is not, right?
That's right. So it puts us back. To me, attention management is much more empowering than time management, because time marches on no matter what you do, right? This idea of time management gives us the impression that we can somehow manage time. And I know that we think about that as managing our own schedule, right? But how you manage your time doesn't matter if you don't also manage your attention, because whether or not you put something on your schedule doesn't really matter. Even if you do the thing that's on your calendar at this moment, if you work on it a little bit and then, oh, look, an email just came in. What's that? No, I'll get back to that later. Okay, where was I doing this thing? And then, oh, look, there's a text message. Let me just get that. And wait, no, okay, where was I doing this thing, right? So how you manage your time only matters to the extent that you also devote your attention. And so that's why I think attention management is much more relevant frame for productivity in the 21st century than time management.
Gotcha, totally. So one of the big issues in today's world, work world, the corporate world, is work-life balance. Why is it so difficult for people to achieve a healthy work-life balance?
Yeah, there's all kinds of reasons that it's difficult to achieve a healthy work-life balance. Some are sort of cultural, whether that's corporate culture and sort of society in general, and some are personal, right? We tell ourselves stories about, this is how it has to be, or I have to do this, or my job requires this. But the truth is, there are people who get similar or better results who do have a better work-life balance. And ultimately, if you are a knowledge worker, right, meaning we tend to describe knowledge workers as people whose job outputs are things that are difficult to touch and count, right? So if your job is based on, if your job outputs are things like analysis and solutions to problems and ideas and creativity and relationships, right? If you sit at a computer for the most part to do your work, then you likely fall under this heading of knowledge worker. And that means that thinking is the tool that you use to do your job. And so our brains produce the thinking, right? And our brains are not optimal when we work too much. And so what I like to say is that sometimes the best thing that you can do for your work is not work, because the more you do other things, and I'm not saying that you should, slack off, but beyond about 45 or 50 hours a week, your productivity actually starts to go down. And after 55 hours, it falls off a cliff. So taking care of your physical and your emotional, mental well-being is actually going to produce better results for you.
Right. So in the end, who's responsible for work-life balance? Is it the employee? Is it the manager? Is it the company? Who is it?
Yeah, the truth is it's both. We can't really evaluate our productivity in a vacuum, right? Somebody could be very productive in one setting, in one company, and pretty unproductive in another company. And often the difference is the climate or the culture, right? So the culture definitely matters. So the leaders have to make it easier for people to have an appropriate work-life balance. But the truth is also that no one can give you work-life balance as an individual. You have to take it. So if you recognize these stories that you're telling yourself, my job requires long hours, or I have to be always on, or, it's the only way to get anything done, is to work all the time or work a lot, then think about whether or not those stories are actually serving you, and take back control. And so it's really, it's both.
Nice. So what tips do you have for team leaders then to help their team members achieve a better work-life balance?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question, especially in the age of remote work. And one of the things is that leaders need to create a culture that is friendly to vacation and downtime. And so one of the ways to do that, for example, is to keep work communication to work hours to the extent that it's possible. Now, I understand that a lot of people work with global teams, and that makes it really challenging. But if you're emailing somebody individually or communicating with somebody individually or in small groups, as a leader, regardless of when you are working, and I know people work at all different times, but it is useful to think about, is this during work hours? Because it doesn't really matter if a leader says to a team member, oh, I know that I email you at night and I don't expect you to answer until you come in the next day. It really doesn't matter how many times the leader is going to say that. If they are sending emails late at night and on weekends, early mornings, holidays, whenever it is, then the team is going to be looking for those messages all the time. And so it makes it very difficult to unplug. So a really easy thing that a leader could do is just schedule the email, regardless of when you send it, schedule the email to go out during business hours. And almost every email client has that capability now to schedule the message delivery time. So that's just one really easy thing that leaders can do. And I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review about it, and it's called "Your Late Night Emails Are Hurting Your Team." So it might be a useful resource.
So you mentioned turning off, and in social media, social media is always on. Our jobs are always on. So what are some tips that you have to help people disconnect and turn off, get some me time in a world where everything in social media is always on?
Yeah, social media is a challenge, especially if your job depends on it. But the truth is, I think about social media as kind of a party that's always happening, right? There's always things going on social media. There's always conversations. There's always new things that people are posting. But you have to think of it, I mean, in the real world, sometimes you have to leave the party. And the social media world is the same. You can have an always on industry, but you can't have always on people. And the more you work and the more you stay connected, the more likely you are to start being resentful and being cranky. And those are symptoms of burnout. And so recognizing that being always on contributes to our own burnout maybe can be a motivation to help people unplug. Because the truth is, even if somebody, DMs you on Twitter or something, you can't have an always on lifestyle. And if your job depends on social media, then the organization needs to structure itself in such a way that if immediate responses to social media are required, no matter the time of day, no matter the day of the year, the day of the week, the time of day, then you have to, as a leader, you need to organize your company in shifts, the same way, emergency rooms operate, because a job can be a 24/7 job, but a person can't be a 24/7 employee.
So let's talk about productivity for a second. The job of a team leader is to make sure his team's productive. So how can team leaders help their team members become more productive without driving everybody crazy?
Yeah, I think the first thing to consider is what we mean by productivity, what we mean by being productive. And to me, the definition of the word productive that guides my work is from the dictionary, and it is achieving a significant result. So how productive you are in any given time frame is how much progress you have made on the results that are significant to you personally or professionally. And the significance changes with the time horizon, right? So if I were to ask you at the end of today, what was your most significant result? You'd probably give me a different answer than if I asked you at the end of the week, what was your most significant result? And if I asked you at the end of the month, what was your most significant result? And at the end of the year, and at the end of the decade, and ultimately at the end of your life, what was most significant to you? Because ultimately that's productivity, right? Did I live a life of choice? Was I the kind of person I wanted to be? Did I have the kind of impact I wanted to have? The answers to those questions happen in moments. And so we need to think about not only moment to moment, day to day, week by week productivity, but we need to think big picture productivity, those long-term projects, and ultimately, am I living aligned with my values? So to answer your question about how can leaders help their team to be more productive, I think you said without driving everybody crazy. I think it's just the opposite. When you help your team members be more productive, you're not driving them crazy, which is what maybe you typically are doing, because we have these expectations for constant communication. So just one example is I hear a lot of leaders tell their team members that we have to be responsive to communication. And so in the absence of any other information, being responsive means being fast. And if somebody is told that they need to be fast with their communication and they want to be the best at that, then the best version of fast is immediate. And so basically what you're telling team members is that they need to respond to every communication immediately, or at least to important communications immediately. Well, how do I know what the important communication is until I look at it as it arrives? Right? So I have to check every message as it arrives. And if I have to check every message as it arrives and I get a message every minute or two, as most of us do, then how am I supposed to do any other work at any level of quality? If any of my work requires more than a minute or two of sustained attention, how can I do that if I have to check every email as it arrives? So that's just one thing to consider as a leader.
So one thing, it seems like in today's environment, everything is a priority. So how can team leaders then help team members prioritize their work?
Yeah. Well, in a situation where everything is important, or we have to treat everything like it is important, which you do if you expect people to answer important messages quickly, then I have to check every message as it arrives to see which one is important. And so I have leaders call me often and say, well, my team needs help prioritizing because they don't have prioritization skills. Well, maybe they don't have prioritization skills, but also you've basically told them that they have to treat everything as if it is important. So part of the reason that your team can't prioritize is likely because of the environment that you've set up as far as expectation to response to communications. And so if leaders prioritize thoughtful, undistracted work over immediate responses, then that helps people understand, well, these are the things that are on my to-do list today. These are the things that are really going to move the needle. And so I need to spend, 30 or 60 minutes undistracted. I need to sign out of social media. I need to sign out of my email, of my chat tools, and I need to just do that thing so that I can do it quickly and do it well. And then I can feel like a sense of achievement at the end of the day. I feel like I've achieved something. Ultimately, that's what I help people do, is achieve what's most important to them. And managing your attention is the fastest path to achievement.
In the end, doesn't it kind of boil down to expectations? Because I see a lot of employees working, they don't really know what the true expectations of their manager is. And so they assume that everything is a priority, that everything's important. So talk about that just for a moment, about establishing expectations.
Yeah, I think ultimately people know what they were hired to do. Most people understand the most important outcomes of their job. And certainly if you don't, then that's a conversation to have with your leader. And that's a conversation that leaders need to provide clarity about the most important role, ultimately the most important outcomes of each individual's job. But then if people are clear about what their most important outcomes are, then the world is always going to have expectations on us. And most people recognize that we can't live up to people's expectations in every area, but for some reason, these expectations of response times are something that people just feel helpless against. Well, people expect. Well, maybe they do expect, or maybe they're hoping, but maybe if you responded in an hour, it would still be okay. And one of the things that leaders need to do is to create emergency channels, right? Because if you send email in the case of urgent or time-sensitive situations, but you also send email for everything else, then how am I supposed to know? Then I have to check every message as it arrives. So it's useful to create a channel that says, look, if I really need it right away, and in most industries, that's not really a thing. There are very few things that can't wait an hour. But leaders can identify that urgent channel, right? You can feel comfortable to close out your email if you need to get something done. And if something really urgent or time sensitive comes up, I will text you, for example.
Good. So you mentioned email, and you mentioned also that it seems like messages come in constantly around the clock, every minute or two. So what tips do you have to help us deal with inbox overload?
Yeah, most people get way more email than they could ever realistically answer. So the first thing to do when managing email, and there's a whole bunch of others in my most recent book called The Happy Inbox. But one of the most important things that people can do is make sure that they are filtering. So for example, if you get 200 email messages a day, it's very unlikely that if you figure that every email takes about 2 minutes on average to sort of, read it and figure out what you need to do with it. So that's 400 minutes. If you get 200 emails a day, that's 400 minutes of stuff that you have to do. And if we spent 400 minutes of our day every day managing email, then there would be very little time to do anything else. So we need to cut down on the number of messages that make it to our inbox. And so filtering by using rules and unsubscribe and a variety of different tactics, so that you make sure that the messages that come that end up in your inbox are real messages from real people addressed specifically to you. So for example, you could create a rule that says any email where I'm in the CC line automatically goes into this folder, and the folder is called like FYI or something. So, and also system generated goes automatically over here, or, marking things as junk, unsubscribing, investing a little bit of time into evaluating the emails that you receive and making a plan to minimize those ones that are unimportant. That is an investment because it will save you time in the future. So that's the first thing I recommend.
And of course, the other thing is people could read your book, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, talk about that. Your books, you've written how many? And if you had one book to suggest for our audience, which one would it be?
Yeah, as far as which one to start with, so the three colored books that on the shelf here, Attention Management, From To Do to Done, and The Happy Inbox, are part of the Empowered Productivity series. And they illustrate my workflow management process. And so for team members, I think a good place to start is Attention Management, which is the first book in the series. For leaders, the best place to start might be Work Without Walls. And the subtitle of that is An Executive's Guide to Attention Management, Productivity, and the Future of Work. Because I think the biggest way that you can have an impact as a leader is to recognize how much impact you have on your team members and impact them positively. And Work Without Walls is about that. And depending on when this airs, 2023, there'll be a new book for leaders as well, a follow-up to Work Without Walls. So one of those two, the new book is called Everyone Wants to Work Here. And so one of those two books is a great place for leaders to start. For individuals, I recommend, or individual contributors, I recommend starting with Attention Management.
Okay, perfect. So talk about the types of clients that you work with and what kind of programs do you offer in addition to your books?
Yeah, I work with groups and teams, large companies, small companies, whose leaders understand that well-rounded employees are better employees, right? Employees who have something left to give back at the end of the day to their families, to their communities, and that appropriate work-life balance is not only important to a successful organization, but I would say is required for sustainable growth of an organization. So that's kind of the belief system of the leaders that hire me to come in and train their teams. I also speak at conferences and industry associations, and I have an online program that is available once or twice a year for individuals to do on demand. Yeah, I've worked with larger companies and government agencies and municipalities like the NASA and Google and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but I also work with local HVAC companies and home care organizations. I work with franchises. I work with a lot of construction and civil engineering firms, technology companies. It really, I'm not sure that there's an industry that I haven't worked in, to be honest.
These days, then, how do you deliver your programs? Are they virtual? Are they live? How does it work?
Yeah, I can deliver, like many people. I needed to figure out a way to make virtual engagements engaging and useful. So I created a pretty high-end home studio where most people tell me that it is very similar to an in-the-room experience, because the truth is there's no such thing as too long. There's only too boring. And so it's really important to me. It was really important to me to figure out how to deliver virtual engagements that held people's interest. But I also am certainly back on the road doing live engagements as well. And then there's certainly those hybrid conferences and things where there is a group of people in a room, maybe with me, but then there are people logging in online. So all of the above, really.
Excellent. So what's the best way for people who are interested in your programs, who are struggling with work-life balance, productivity, with prioritization, all of these things that affect our daily lives, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, my website at maurathomas.com, MauraThomas. Maurathomas.com is the place that has all the information for leaders who are thinking that their team might need some help in the areas of workflow management, prioritization, work-life balance, just general productivity improvement, managing distractions. You can visit maurathomas.com/inquire. And I would be happy to have a chat and offer as much complimentary guidance as I can based on your unique situation.